What if the Cleveland Browns have already decided which players are done and no one is saying it out loud? Behind the scenes, moves are quietly lining up that could shake this roster fast. And the most surprising part, one of these decisions might already be sealed and fans aren't ready for it. And the first name on that list is not who you think. What if everything you think you know about the Cleveland Browns right now is only half the story? Because behind the scenes, something is shifting, quietly, strategically, and a lot faster than people expected. Over the past few days, there's been a growing sense that this team isn't just tweaking the roster, they're preparing to completely reshape it. Not in a loud, headline-grabbing way, not with blockbuster trades or shocking press conferences, but with calculated decisions that slowly push certain players closer to the edge until one day they're just gone. And here where it gets interesting. Some fans believe this is part of a bigger long-term plan. There's been talk, unconfirmed but persistent, that the organization could be thinking beyond this season, that maybe, just maybe, they're willing to sacrifice short-term stability for something bigger down the line. A future quarterback, a reset, a new identity. But at the same time, the moves we're starting to see don't fully match that idea. Because teams that plan to fall back don't usually make moves like this. Instead, what's happening feels different, more intentional, more immediate, like a front office that's not waiting around, like a coaching staff that already knows exactly who fits and who doesn't. And that's where the tension starts to build. Because when a new vision takes over, not everyone survives the transition. It doesn't matter how recently you were signed. It doesn't matter where you were drafted. It doesn't even matter if you've shown flashes of potential. If you don't fit what's coming next, your time runs out faster than anyone expects. Right now, there are multiple players on this roster who might already be on that path. No announcements yet, no official confirmations, just patterns, decisions, silence where there used to be attention. And sometimes that silence says everything. Because in the NFL, players don't always get dramatic exits. Sometimes they just slowly disappear from the plan until the plan moves on without them. And if you're paying close attention, the signs are already there. The Browns aren't just adjusting, they're choosing a direction. And not everyone is going with them. And the first player quietly being pushed out might already be out of the future entirely. And then there's the name that almost nobody is bringing up anymore, Dillon Gabriel. Not because he's irrelevant, not because he was never part of the plan, but because quietly the conversation has already moved past him. And that might be the biggest sign of all. Just a short time ago, Gabriel was seen as a legitimate piece of the Browns' future, a draft investment, a player worth developing, someone who, at the very least, could compete for a meaningful role in this quarterback room. There was curiosity around him, there was discussion, there was attention. Now there's silence. And in the NFL, silence around a quarterback is never accidental. Because while his name fades into the background, other names are getting louder. The focus has clearly shifted toward a potential future built around Deshaun Watson and Shedeur Sanders. Whether that competition happens exactly as some reports suggest is still uncertain, but what stands out is who's not being included in those conversations. Gabriel. No mentions in long-term projections. No signs of him being developed as a serious option. No indication that he's part of what this offense is becoming. And when a team starts planning its future without even referencing you, that tells you everything you need to know. Some fans believe it's purely performance-related. And yes, the results didn't exactly demand attention. Limited wins, inconsistent impact, nothing that forced the organization to lock him into their plans. But others think it goes deeper than that. Because this doesn't feel like a normal developmental situation, it feels like a shift in belief. A quiet decision that what he offers just doesn't match where this team is going. And here's the part that raises even more questions. There's been little to no push from the organization to publicly support him. No strong backing, no clear messaging that he's still in the mix, just a gradual drift away from relevance. Some reports suggest the Browns could still explore adding another quarterback. Some fans believe Gabriel might be kept around temporarily as depth or even as a potential trade piece if the right opportunity appears. But none of those scenarios point to him being the answer. They point to him being expendable. And that's the reality of this league. You don't always get a clear ending. Sometimes your role just gets smaller, your name gets quieter, and before you realize it, the future has already moved on without you. And for Dillon Gabriel, that moment might already be here. But the real reason behind this shift, it's not just about performance. It's not just about performance, it's about fit. Because when Todd Monken stepped into this situation, he didn't just bring a new playbook, he brought a completely different philosophy. And in the NFL, philosophy can decide careers faster than stats ever will. Monken's system is built on aggression, vertical pressure, stretching defenses downfield. It demands quarterbacks who can push the ball, create explosive plays, and consistently threaten defenses beyond the short game. It's fast, it's risky, and when it works, it completely changes an offense. But not every quarterback is built for that. And that's where the disconnect begins with Dillon Gabriel. Because Gabriel wasn't brought in for this system. He was brought in under Kevin Stefanski, a completely different offensive mind, with a different structure, different priorities, and a different vision for how the quarterback position should operate. Under that system, timing, control, and efficiency mattered more than explosive vertical plays. Now the priorities have changed. And when that happens, players don't always get time to adjust. Some fans believe Gabriel simply hasn't shown enough to earn a bigger role. Others think he hasn't even been given the right opportunity to prove himself in this new system. But there's also a growing sense that the decision might already be made internally, that regardless of development, he just doesn't match what Monken wants moving forward. And that's the part that rarely gets talked about publicly. Because teams don't always announce when a player doesn't fit anymore, they just start shifting away, fewer reps, less attention, different conversations. Until eventually, the player is no longer part of the plan. There's also been quiet speculation surrounding what the Browns might do next. Some reports suggest they could explore trade options. Others believe they might hold on to him temporarily as depth, waiting for the right moment to move on. And yes, there have even been whispers about potential interest from teams like Atlanta, but nothing confirmed. And that uncertainty, it only adds to the tension. Because when a player's future becomes a maybe, it usually doesn't stay that way for long. The reality is simple, even if it's uncomfortable. New systems don't wait. New coaches don't pause their vision. And if you're not aligned with what's coming next, you don't get phased in. You get phased out. And in this case, it feels like that process has already started. But Gabriel isn't the only one feeling that pressure. And just when you think this situation couldn't get any more confusing, another name enters the conversation, and this one raises even more questions. Jack Stoll. Because here's the part that doesn't immediately make sense. Why would a team bring in a player, only to potentially move on from him before he even fully settles in? At first glance, it feels contradictory. Teams don't usually sign players just to cut them weeks or months later. Especially not in a league where every roster move is calculated, every contract is evaluated, and every spot matters. So naturally, fans start wondering what changed. But when you look a little closer, the situation starts to reveal something deeper. This isn't about a mistake, it's about direction. Stoll's profile is very specific. He's known primarily as a blocking tight end, a player who contributes in the trenches, a role player who helps establish the run game and supports protection schemes, and in the right system, that role has real value. But here's the problem. That right system might not exist in Cleveland anymore. With Todd Monken shaping the offense, the expectations for skill positions, especially tight ends, start to shift. This isn't a scheme built around conservative, ground-heavy execution. It's designed to stretch the field, create mismatches, generate explosive plays through the air. And in that kind of system, versatility becomes everything. Tight ends aren't just blockers anymore, they're expected to run routes, create separation, and become legitimate receiving threats. They need to be dynamic, adaptable, dangerous in space. So the question becomes unavoidable. Does Jack Stoll fit that mold? Some fans believe he could still carve out a role as a situational contributor. Others think his skill set is simply too limited for what this offense is trying to become. And when you add another factor into the equation, the situation becomes even more complicated. Age. At 28 years old, Stoll isn't viewed as a developmental piece. He's not a long-term project. He doesn't come with the upside that younger players bring to the table. And right now, the Browns are clearly leaning toward building something younger, faster, and more flexible. Which means every roster spot becomes a competition between present value and future potential. And that's not an easy battle to win if you're already seen as a finished product. There's also the reality of depth. The tight end room isn't empty. There are other players competing for those same snaps, players who might offer more in the passing game or simply align better with the direction this offense is heading. So even if Stoll does everything right, it still might not be enough. Because sometimes the decision isn't about what you do. It's about what the team wants to become. And right now, Cleveland looks like a team that's evolving quickly, possibly faster than some players can adapt. Which leads to an uncomfortable possibility that this move was never about long-term plans at all. It was about short-term flexibility, a temporary option in a system that's already moving past him. And if that's the case, then Stoll's situation might already be decided before the real competition even begins. But if you think that's the toughest decision the Browns have to make, the next name might surprise you even more. But if there's one name on this list that truly complicates everything, it's Isaiah McGuire. Because unlike the other situations, this one isn't simple. It's not about clear underperformance. It's not about a player who obviously doesn't belong. In fact, that's what makes this so uncomfortable. McGuire can play. He's shown flashes. He's proven he can contribute. And on a lot of teams across the league, a player with his skill set would be seen as a valuable rotational piece, someone you keep, develop, and rely on when needed. So why is his name even in this conversation? Because sometimes in the NFL, talent isn't the problem. The situation is. Start with the depth chart. The Browns already have one of the most loaded defensive lines in the league, and it begins with a name that isn't going anywhere: Myles Garrett. His role is locked. His presence alone reshapes how offenses prepare. Then you look beyond that, and the competition only gets tighter. There are other edge rushers in this room who have already carved out their roles. Players the coaching staff trusts. Players who may not be stars but fit exactly what the defense needs. And when a position group becomes that crowded, it stops being about who can play and starts being about who must stay. That's where things get difficult for McGuire. Because now you're no longer comparing talent in isolation, you're comparing value, fit, cost, flexibility. And that's where the financial side quietly enters the conversation. McGuire's contract isn't outrageous, but it's enough to matter. In a league where teams are constantly balancing the salary cap, every million counts. And when you have younger, cheaper players who can deliver similar production or at least develop into it, the math starts to shift. Not dramatically, not immediately, but enough to raise questions. Some fans believe the Browns could restructure his deal, keeping him in the system while adjusting the financial impact. Others think a trade might make more sense, moving him to a team that has a clearer need at his position. And then there's the possibility no one wants to talk about: that he simply becomes the odd man out. Not because he failed, but because the roster around him made him expendable. And that's one of the hardest realities of professional football. You can do your job, you can improve, you can show up and perform when given the chance and still find yourself on the outside looking in, not because you weren't good enough, but because the team had too many good options. And Cleveland might be heading straight into that kind of decision. Because if they add another edge rusher in the draft, and some reports suggest that's a real possibility, then this situation tightens even further. Suddenly, it's not just about depth anymore, it's about prioritizing future development over current stability. And when that shift happens, players like McGuire are often the ones who feel it first. Quietly, gradually, then all at once. Because once the numbers stop working, the decision usually follows. And if that decision does come, it won't be an easy one to explain. Not to fans, not to analysts, and definitely not to a player who's done enough to stay but might not fit what comes next. Because this isn't just about who deserves a spot. It's about who fits the direction. And right now, that direction might be moving faster than anyone expected. But when you step back from the individual names, from the speculation, the depth charts, and the uncertainty, a much clearer picture starts to form. Because this isn't random. This isn't just a few players fighting for roster spots. This is a strategy. And it's being driven from the top by Andrew Barry. If you've been paying attention to how this front office operates, one theme keeps coming up again and again: youth, speed, flexibility, long-term control. That's not just a preference, it's a blueprint. Barry has made it clear in multiple discussions that the Browns want to build one of the youngest rosters in the league, not as a side effect, but as a priority, as a competitive advantage. And in today's NFL, that idea carries real weight. Younger players mean cheaper contracts, more energy, more upside, more room to develop within your system instead of forcing veterans to adapt to it. It gives a team flexibility, not just on the field but financially. And when you combine that with a coaching staff trying to implement a new identity, it becomes even more important. Because younger players are easier to shape. They haven't been locked into habits. They haven't been built for a different system. They're more willing and often more capable of becoming exactly what the coaching staff wants them to be. And that's where this entire roster situation starts to make sense. Because if youth is the priority, then certain types of players automatically become vulnerable. Veterans without elite production. Role players with limited upside. Contracts that don't match long-term value. Those players don't always get dramatic exits, they just slowly get replaced. And that's exactly what this offseason is starting to look like. Think about what the Browns already accomplished with their younger talent. There's a growing belief among fans that their recent rookie class delivered real impact. Not just flashes, but meaningful contributions. Players stepping in early and proving they belong. That changes everything. Because once a front office sees that kind of success, it reinforces the strategy. It tells them they don't need to rely as heavily on older, established names. It tells them they can draft, develop, and build internally. And right now, Cleveland is in a position to double down on that approach. With multiple draft picks available, the Browns have the opportunity to inject even more young talent into this roster. More competition, more speed, more players who fit the new system from day one. But here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Every new player added means someone else has to go. Roster spots aren't unlimited, and when a team commits to getting younger, those spots usually come from players who are already there but don't align with the future. That's where the tension comes in. Because it's easy to talk about youth in theory, it's easy to praise the idea of building for the future. But when it starts affecting real players, players who have contributed, players who have value, that's when it becomes difficult. That's when fans start asking questions. Why this player? Why now? Why move on from someone who can still help? And the answer isn't always satisfying. Because it's not always about today. It's about what this team wants to become tomorrow. And right now, the Browns are clearly choosing a direction that prioritizes growth over familiarity, upside over stability, potential over proven, but limited production. It's a calculated risk. Because if these young players develop the way the organization believes they will, Cleveland could build something fast, something explosive, something sustainable. But if they do, then all those decisions, all those departures start to look very different. And that's the balance the Browns are walking right now. They're not just reshaping a roster. They're betting on a vision. And not everyone is part of it. And this is where the conversation takes a turn, because once you look at all these moves together, a bigger question starts to form. What exactly are the Cleveland Browns trying to do? Are they building a team to compete right now, or are they quietly setting the stage for something further down the line? Because depending on how you interpret these decisions, you can argue it both ways. On one side, there's a growing belief among some fans that this feels like the early stages of a long-term reset. Not a full rebuild, but something close. A strategy where the team becomes younger, more flexible, and better positioned for future drafts and quarterback opportunities. Some reports suggest the front office could be thinking ahead to future seasons, possibly even targeting a stronger quarterback class down the line. But here's the thing, that idea doesn't fully line up with everything we're seeing. Because teams that are planning to step back, don't usually bring in a coach like Todd Monken. This is a coach with a reputation built on aggressive offense, high scoring, and immediate impact. He's not known for slow rebuilds or patient resets. His system is designed to produce results, and more importantly, this is his opportunity to prove himself as a head coach at the highest level. That kind of situation doesn't typically come with time to experiment. It comes with pressure to win. So now you have two ideas colliding. A roster getting younger, possibly moving on from certain players, creating flexibility for the future. And a coaching staff that feels built to compete right now. That's where things get complicated. Because trying to do both at the same time, that's one of the hardest balancing acts in the NFL. Some fans believe this is actually a smart middle ground strategy. Stay competitive while quietly building the foundation for the future. Don't completely tear things down, but don't commit too heavily to the present either. In theory, it sounds ideal. In reality, it's risky. Because if you lean too far in either direction, things can fall apart quickly. If the young players don't develop fast enough, you're not competitive. If you don't fully commit to winning now, you miss your window with the talent you already have. And suddenly, you're stuck in the middle. Not bad enough to rebuild properly. Not good enough to truly contend. And that's a place no franchise wants to be. There's also another layer to this situation that's quietly adding pressure: the quarterback position. Because everything eventually circles back to that. With names like Deshaun Watson still in the picture and growing attention around players like Shedeur Sanders, the Browns are clearly thinking about the future of that position. But how they approach it will define everything else. Do they commit fully to what they have now? Do they prepare for a transition? Or do they try to manage both timelines at once? Each option comes with consequences. And right now, it's not entirely clear which path they've chosen. That uncertainty is what makes this situation so fascinating and so dangerous. Because when a team sends mixed signals, getting younger while also bringing in a win-now coach, it creates expectations on both sides. Fans expect progress. The front office expects development. The coaching staff expects results. And if those expectations don't align, that's when things start to break. But here's what we do know. The Browns are not standing still. They're making moves, they're shaping the roster, they're adjusting their identity. And whether that leads to immediate success or sets up something bigger down the line depends entirely on how these decisions play out. Because trying to compete and rebuild at the same time isn't impossible. But it is a gamble. And right now, it feels like Cleveland is all in on it. But the timeline for these decisions, that's where things get even more intense. But here, where everything becomes real, because this isn't some distant, slow-moving situation. This isn't months away. This isn't something the Cleveland Browns can afford to take their time with. The timeline for all of this, it's already in motion. And it's moving faster than most people realize. Because once the offseason reaches a certain point, decisions stop being theoretical and start becoming final. It begins with the NFL draft. This is where everything can shift overnight. If the Browns decide to target a quarterback or even make an unexpected move at another key position, it immediately changes the math of the roster. Suddenly, players who thought they had time don't. Roles that felt secure disappear, and depth charts that looked stable get completely reshuffled. One draft pick can quietly push a player out of the picture. 2 or 3, that can trigger a chain reaction. And based on some reports, Cleveland is actively evaluating multiple positions, including quarterback. Some fans believe this could lead to a surprise addition. Others think it's simply due diligence, but either way, the impact would be immediate. Because once a new name enters the room, someone else has to leave it. Then comes the next phase, OTAs and early offseason programs. This is where things start to become visible internally. Reps begin to shift, rotations change, certain players get more opportunities while others slowly fade into the background, and even though nothing is officially announced, the coaching staff already knows who's trending up and who's falling behind. This is often where the quiet decisions are made. Not in press conferences, not in public statements, but on practice fields behind closed doors where every snap is evaluated and every role is questioned. And if a player is already on the edge, this is where that edge becomes thinner. Then comes training camp. And this is where everything accelerates. Because now it's not just about evaluation, it's about competition. Every position battle becomes real, every mistake matters more, every performance is judged with the final roster in mind. And for players already under pressure, this is where the situation can flip quickly. A strong camp can save a career. A slow start can end one. And the reality is, not everyone gets equal chances. Some players enter camp already fighting uphill battles, whether it's due to system fit, contract value, or simply the direction the team is heading. Which brings us back to the names we've been discussing. Players like Dillon Gabriel might not even make it to the later stages of this timeline. There's a growing sense among some fans that his situation could be resolved earlier, possibly even before training camp begins. Whether that means a trade, a release, or something less expected, the urgency around the quarterback room suggests that decision won't be delayed. Other situations like Jack Stoll or Isaiah McGuire could take longer to unfold. Their futures might depend on how the draft plays out, how competition develops, and how the coaching staff evaluates their fit over time. But make no mistake, the clock is already ticking. And in the NFL, once that clock starts, it doesn't slow down. Because roster decisions aren't just about who performs the best. They're about timing. They're about opportunity. And sometimes, they're about making a move before you're forced to. That's why teams don't wait until the last moment if they already see the direction things are heading. They act early, they create space, they make room for what comes next. And right now, Cleveland looks like a team preparing to do exactly that. There's also an emotional side to this timeline that fans don't always see. Because while these decisions feel strategic on the surface, they impact real careers, players who have worked to earn their spot, players who believe they still have something to prove, players who might not even realize how close they are to losing their place on the roster. And when those decisions finally happen, they often feel sudden. Unexpected, even when the signs were there all along. That's what makes this moment so important. Because we're not waiting for change anymore. We're in the middle of it. The draft will bring answers. OTAs will reveal intentions. Training camp will finalize outcomes. And by the time the season approaches, this roster could look very different from what fans see today. Not just slightly adjusted, but reshaped, refocused, redefined. And when that happens, it won't feel like a gradual transition. It will feel like everything changed at once. Because in the NFL, that's usually how it works. Slow build, then sudden impact. And for the Cleveland Browns, that impact might be closer than anyone expects. And when you put all of this together, it becomes clear that this isn't just about 3 players. This is about direction. Because what the Cleveland Browns are doing right now goes far beyond simple roster moves. It's not just about who stays and who goes, it's about defining what this team is going to be moving forward. You have a new system led by Todd Monken, a front office guided by Andrew Berry that clearly values youth, flexibility, and long-term upside, and a roster that's starting to reflect those priorities more and more with each decision. That combination creates pressure. Because once you commit to a vision like this, there's no halfway point. You either build it the right way, or you watch it fall apart. And that's why these moves matter. Players like Dillon Gabriel, Jack Stoll, and Isaiah McGuire aren't just individual cases, they represent something bigger. They represent the type of decisions teams have to make when they're choosing a path. Do you hold onto familiarity? Or do you move forward even if it means letting go of players who can still contribute? Because in the NFL, standing still is not an option. You're either evolving or you're falling behind. Some fans believe the Browns are building something dangerous, something fast, young, and explosive that could surprise people sooner than expected. Others think this approach comes with serious risk, that moving on too quickly or betting too heavily on potential could backfire in ways that set the team back years. And the truth is, both sides might have a point. Because this isn't a safe strategy. It's a calculated gamble. A belief that the system will work, that the young players will develop, that the decisions being made today will lead to something better tomorrow. But if those assumptions don't hold, then every move becomes a question. Every departure becomes a mistake. Every risk becomes a regret. And that's what makes this moment so important. Because years from now, people will look back at this offseason and ask one simple question. Was this the moment the Browns built something real? Or the moment they let something slip away? And right now, no one truly knows the answer. But one thing is certain. The decisions being made today won't stay quiet for long. Because in the NFL, the moves you ignore today are the ones that define you tomorrow.